There are people who spend their lives avoiding storms. They build routines and calendars and quiet little habits designed to keep the sky clear. They look at thunderheads on the horizon and think, not today. And then there are the storm chasers, the ones who can't help but drive toward the lightning, not out of recklessness, but because something in the chaos calls to them. They want to understand the wind. They want to name it. They want to know why it stirs us up the way it does. I think we all chase storms in our own ways. Some of us chase them through art or love or work, trying to find beauty in the mess. And some people build entire lives out of helping others navigate the weather inside their own minds. My guest today is one of those people. I've been talking with James Ochoa for a long time. More than a dozen conversations across another podcast, Taking Control, the ADHD podcast. If you've ever heard those talks, you'll know the pattern. I somehow bring a storm, and James brings the radar. He's the calm voice on the radio saying, "You're not lost. You're just inside the system." For more than 30 years, James has dedicated his life to understanding what happens when the brain refuses to sit still. When thought and feeling turn into weather, he's helped thousands of adults with ADHD learn not just how to survive the storm, but how to see its patterns, even its grace. But Headstone isn't a show about how we cope with chaos. It's about what that chaos teaches us about living. Because chasing storms changes a person. You learn to read the sky. You learn humility and resilience, maybe even awe. At some point, you have to ask yourself, when the storms finally pass, what's left behind? What does someone who spent a lifetime guiding others through turbulence hope remains after the clouds clear? In his work, in his relationships, in the people he's helped. That's where we're headed today, into the calm eye of a life spent chasing meaning through the wind. I'm Pete Wright, and this is Headstone. James, hi.
Hi, Pete.
I'm very grateful that you are here.
Yeah, I'm right on the verge of tears.
How so?
I just, when you chase storms, you don't necessarily stop and reflect on either the next storm coming or the storm that was behind you. And so there seems to be a lot of reflection going on in my life right now for a variety of reasons. And so to hear some of my life story told in a storybook form from a third-person objectivity point of view, just gives me a huge moment of awe and pause and humble and how the hell did I get here?
I wonder that sometimes. I think about you often because of that very perspective that you and I'll say this in maybe as pop culture a crass way as I can. There is a fandom that exists around your work, right? People whose lives you have affected in the best possible way. And I wonder just how aware of that you are.
Not very. I hear it. I see letters. I've been given artwork. I probably have 7 or 8 pieces of very personal art that others have gifted me based on our work together. Some of it is just time-stopping, one-of-a-kind pieces of art. And I think if truth be told about that, my valid concern, I believe, based on my hyperactive, impulsive, ego-driven life in a lot of ways that feels that way many times, that if I let that significance in, my ego would grab it and go to the moon with it. And I don't know what would happen. So I constantly tether it and appreciate when it comes across my radar. Yet if I think too deeply about it, one, I think my ego could grab it. Two, the responsibility that seems to be weighted with it can be overwhelming. That, yeah, I've given people perspective. And I think, gee, I just stumbled into this, Pete, because I didn't know what else to do in my 20s when my life was spiraling in very dangerous, out of control ways that could have led to federal penitentiaries and, the loss of a finger on my right hand. And I mean, it's a really tragic stuff that it was like, so I wonder if I got into this to help myself first, because I didn't know what else to do. But no, do I reflect on that? Every now and again. It's a very humbling space. I can become pretty awestruck in that space. I don't have a lot of words for it.
Fair. That's fair. So let's go back a little bit further than spiraling James in his 20s. What I come over to your house and you're 12 and I want to play kickball. What's the kid that I meet there like? Tell me about that guy.
Well, you come over to my house at 12. We've just moved from about 1,100 square feet and 10 people growing up, 8 children, 2 adults, 3 dogs.
Oh my God.
So we've just moved from that to about 1,700 square foot home on an acre of land with a garage apartment behind it that was built in the 20s. And so we have land to run on now. And so I'm 12 years old and I'm discovering, all sorts of things. But you would have also got me changing the brakes on our car and tuning up the cars that my 18-year-old brother had taught me to do because he was getting ready to go to college. So I was I became the taskmaster at the house of the one to take care of things.
What number were you in the 8?
I was 7 out of 8. So there
7 out of 8.
So there are 8 children, first 7 and 8 years. 6 of those are boys. I'm number 7. My younger brother is born 4 years later from me, so he feels like he grew up in a separate family.
For sure.
And he was the apple of my mother's eye, and she protected him like no one's business. Stay away from this one.
This one isn't bruised yet. Don't touch him.
So at 12 years old, I'm exploring middle school. I'm helping out around the house. I'm cutting an acre of lawn. I'm pretty geeky. I've got glasses. I haven't yet discovered contacts at 18, so I have Coke bottle glasses, so my eyes look very skewed and awkward. But yet I still played baseball, so I was still a baseball player at that time. I have a triple play to my name, Pete.
No kidding.
At 11 years old, bases loaded, playing third base, line drive hit to me. I catch it, stomp on third, throw it to first, catch the guy off first. And it was 55 years later, only recently, I learned that my best friend from childhood, Andy, was the one on first base catching that ball. He was the first baseman. I didn't remember that.
Check you out. Yeah.
My older brother recalled that story to me and said, yeah, I don't know where that came. That is just so that's who I was. I was a lot of chaos around the house, a lot of activity, a lot of cooking,
What do you think drove? I mean, did you have any sense early on of your own strength of introspection?
Only in hindsight. I don't know. Well, one, I know enough developmentally as a specialist that children don't typically have that kind of reflective space unless it's hindsight from adulthood. It's unusual to have it in childhood, but that's normal. I do know that I looked for ways of getting out of the chaos around me. So that could be from I wasn't a head banger as a child, which would be a child who hit their head because of a stimulus factor they were seeking. I was a head bumper in that I would bump my head on a couch and bounce it while I watched a cartoon, while I was eating my favorite Cocoa Puffs. It was a way to get out of the chaos. So that introspection started with, how do I resource or how do I find my happy place, my safe spaces? And those were many of them, besides playing games with my brothers and sisters, which I always seem to be the brunt of the joke, which is, I can't imagine being the youngest. That would be pretty true. But I have a funny story at 8 years old of introspection that I've gotten back from my adulthood, which is I do a lot of mindfulness and meditation and cold water work and breathing and all that as a professional now in teaching my clients that as well. But I remember very distinctly in our 3-bedroom, 1-bath household at 8 years old, going into the bathroom around bath time. I don't remember the exact timing. I would fill the tub up with as hot of water as I could stand without harming myself. I would put a rag in the overflow valve of the bathtub to get it as high as I could, and I would float. And my ears would go under the water, and I would float above so I could obviously stay alive. But it was my sensory deprivation tank. And I would stay in that bathtub till it got cold. And there were people banging on the door, and I would put a towel at the bottom of the door to keep the sound from coming. I mean, it was very diligent. And I'm thinking, dude, that is like really well honed as an 8-year-old. I knew how to get away from the world that was just crazy around me all the time. So introspection came in places like that, came in watching cartoons, came in daydreaming in my own mind's eye. It seemed to be natural as I look back.
Are you a float tank guy to this day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're kind of boring to me now, to be honest. People are like, oh, I get all these. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to do some other, this is not enough.
There's a time, I think, as we age, and I know you know more about this than I, so I'll count on you to put more words to it, where we move from that sort of accidental introspection of youth, of using this time to get ourselves lost. You know, I was a superhero kid. I was a Transformers kid. Like, I had entire worlds that existed under my bed, and I only realize now that so much of that was to run from the stresses of youth, the social anxiety, right. The crap. And there was a time when I feel like I learned, it's probably healthier for me to steer into the skid a little bit rather than run away from it. And I know that gets us into your kind of late teens, 20s, and time for you that was awash in complexity. Is that fair? Yeah. Is that too delicate?
I think it's a good 50,000 foot view that it was a complex state of, I was already understanding my learning differences, and that I was not learning to read well in the second grade. And thank Sister Floretta, who I'm sure is no longer living, who taught me how to read in second grade and kept me after school every day with SRA cards. If anyone remembers, stories that you would read, but much to the chagrin that I would leave there and be laughed at by my brothers as it was, because they had to wait in the hot station wagon for me because I had to be after school for 30 minutes. And, so I understood my learning differences, and those were already beginning to show up in my difficulties at school. But the complexity really shifted. We moved into this acre of land with a home that we could have a little more space in. But so I was 15 at the time, God, there's so much of my beautiful life history. I started working for Baskin Robbins at 13. Okay. I was underage.
Well,
I don't know
that's
how
too young, some would say.
I paid $1.75 an hour. I don't know how Mr. John Bove, who's no longer living, did this, but I was the Baskin Robbins Southwest Employee of the Year when I was like 16. I worked for him for 5 years.
Wow.
Okay. So he became a surrogate father to me and many others.
Mm-hmm.
Here, this stowaway Irishman who made it an American dream kind of a space on the beautiful Baskin Robbins, kept it unbelievably clean, taught me how to clean freezers and all kind of things. So I had people like that around. I had my Uncle Arthur, who helped me as a child, who was one of my favorite uncles. And because my dad, I mean, you got 8 kids to parent. I don't know how you be a father to that many. But at 15, my second oldest brother, Ron, was 19 and had an onset of paranoid schizophrenia. And that's a forever changing life story. Yeah. I can tell the day that, my parents got the call from his university that he was in dire straits and he was being held in the police space for safety because he could have harmed others. And so, my dad and I, it was unspoken. I was going with my dad and we went to pick him up. And I can remember bringing him home, and I can remember him through hospitalizations and just the insanity of schizophrenia that was seminal to my life, that I was still living within, still working, going to school, and trying to help my parents orchestrate helping my brother. And his schizophrenia would last another 31 years. He tragically died of a heart attack, actually 20 years ago this Monday at 51, mostly from just a lot of health-related conditions for different reasons. But he changing point in my life because it was that reflective space that provided a pretty significant degree of reflection of like, how can I help others? It became, I was already helping my family, but here was someone that I really couldn't help. We went to NAMI, National Association for Mental Illness support groups. We got him help in the ways that we could, but schizophrenia is a horribly cycling event. But it led to a lot of things that I understood. My father was an identical twin, and his brother had schizophrenia, my Uncle Ernest. Another whole story, my Uncle Ernest is a savant pianist. He grew up in the shadows of my family, and but lived estranged mostly from my family because he was gay, and that was not accepted. And he found himself up in Seattle and lived what appears to be a beautiful life that we were very separated from. And here was a man who wrote symphonies. I got paperwork and things that he wrote, full symphonies, and never went to music school, but could play the piano like anyone's business. And my brother Ron played the guitar, and he could hear a song on the radio, pick up his guitar and start playing it. So my brother, interesting, he was very seminal, very meaningful to my adolescent life. But I also had found, the runaway of drugs and alcohol in my mid-adolescence that provided protection and camaraderie and identity and leadership and all these other pieces but led me into very risky situations, obviously.
You're using a lot of very positive, generally positive words about generally tragic abuse.
And I can say that after 30 or 40 years of therapy and 38 years of drug and alcohol recovery, that I can look back on that and say, I understand the story I went through. I understand who it's molded me into. One of my great metaphors in life is the idea of heating steel. And every time you heat up steel and it cools down, it becomes stronger. And so I just, I had horrible suicidal ideation from 19 to 21 that most people never knew. I just couldn't understand how to live with all this chaos in the world and actually be somebody. I'm like, what what do you do now? I mean, I have learning issues. I'm in college and stumble into my first counselor at 18 or 19 years old at college. Like, I don't know what to do with all this. Just a wise, sage psychologist who just listened and started to reflect back like you, like, oh my gosh, wow, what an intense upbringing. So a lot of change in my adolescence, you know, but I had a good group of friends around me. You know, I went to a Catholic high school, so I had a strong education, but a high state of rebellion. You know, and
rebellion the moment you walk through the door.
And hypocrisy. And so I had a hard time with that hypocrisy, in my opinion, at that young age. And so I challenged a lot of things. I was kicked out of several classrooms for questioning things too deeply. But it was the norm. I mean, that level of chaos was the norm, Pete. It's what I grew up in. It's what I loved and lived in. It's what, you know, I did so much unwinding with my parents' history and how overwhelmed they must have been raising us. And that, you know, in all my sifting, there was really true love back there. They really loved us. And there was a enormously deep spirituality they found through the church that carried them through that, and carried us through that, no matter what I thought about it. So, you know, I've dug for years, and I keep digging, right? I mean, you listen to this all the time in the professional work I do. So yeah, a lot of complexity.
Do you have a sense of your first sort of sense memory, I guess, of mortality and what it means for you? Because I'm putting on very much my own sort of James Ochoa empathetic glasses. I have to imagine in a period like this, you're having an opportunity to reflect on what comes after, or what you're leaving. What is your footprint, you know?
I do in some ways, and mortality reflections came through, you know, several near miss high risk accidents in adolescence, you know, attempting to prevent my brother from running off with my parents' car in a schizophrenic rage again. And other things had to do with my friends and taking high risk activities to the limit. I would somehow walk away. Now, I think we have to really backdrop this, which I didn't earlier, because it is in the book that I wrote on the ADHD spectrum about emotional and mental stress. But I had a closed head injury at 4 that left me in the hospital for 8 weeks. And I was supposed to die from this closed head injury. I fell off the back of a non-moving car playing with my sister. I hit my head on the ground and burst some kind of blood vessel in my brain that started to put pressure on my brain and gave me horrific headaches that since 1965, they couldn't do anything about. And so they told a hyperactive 4-year-old to lay in a hospital bed for 8 weeks. And they took spinal taps to see if there was still blood in my spinal fluid. And after 8 weeks, there wasn't. And they theorized it healed. And I was a miracle baby. And I was 95% of the time, these kind of kids died because they couldn't stop the pressure. So I had a sense of the other side of the overwhelm. I talk about a near-death experience with my father, who built Air Force bases for Vietnam through a private contractor, Bellows Construction in Houston, Texas. And he left the family for 6 months at a time because of the amount of money he could make for us. And the community of aunts and uncles and everybody helped take care of us. But my dad came into my hospital room at age 4, and I still can see it to this day, you know, a blue orb about the color of that bead, you know, was floating above my bed. And I looked at my father at 4 years old and said, I'm not going to die. I'm here for a reason. I didn't know what that reason was. I mean, so was I building legacy back then? Not consciously. But I do think, Pete, who and what I've become today was being threaded through. I'm here for a reason. So each time he asked me about mortality reflection, I probably had 7 or 8 near misses. where I could have died in a second. And I consciously remember those. And I just know that there was something bigger than me was hanging on. Little did I know that I had my parents praying for us every day, rosaries. Who knows how all that works completely, right? But you're asking me about mortality and those reflections. Yeah, I had it more than a few times throughout my life, this thread that was there that I can look back now as a constant. I just didn't know what it was.
Were you always targeting, when you transition into your 20s, were you specifically targeting helping professions? Or did you stumble on that later?
I stumbled upon psychology as an undergraduate because I was fascinated with people, because I was fascinated by the complicated nature of my brother's mental illness. I think that that's probably the simplest way. I'd say fascinating. It was just a conundrum. I'm like, this makes no sense. How is the brain doing this? What is going on here?
And so you've been watching your brother, and suddenly you're introduced to a system and a language and a vernacular that allows you to put words to some sort of a puzzle or mystery.
Right. And so my undergraduate in psychology was a way through making sense of how the human is put together. And I knew I'd wanted to work with people. Another intriguing story at 18, because my learning challenges were so difficult. I had a very hard time learning in school. At 18, we were within a mile of Hobby Airport in Houston, Texas, and I was going to be an airplane mechanic. I said, Mom, I've got the paperwork here. I was filling it out. I could walk to the school. It would have been a very healthy living. It was a great way and I had the papers in front of me, and I was talking, and my mother was someone who was on very high intellect, but came out of the 50s as a woman and never got to reach her dreams of college or secondary learning. Put two of her siblings through college. My mother owned 2 cars and had a full-time job as the head secretary in an insurance company in 1952. Women didn't do that then. So she said she was going to make sure we all went to college. She did the paperwork for us. She made sure things happened. And so when I came home with that and had a talk with her, I can see myself sitting at the living room table. And she just looked at me very calmly and she said, "You don't have to do this. If you want to go and study psychology," because my brothers were accountants and engineers and they were going to, make enough money and all these other, we were in poverty. It was like we had to find a way to make money. She said, "You can go into psychology and be happy. You can do that." And I tore up that application to mechanic school. And I said, I want to go help people. I don't know what I'm going to do. And that set me off on this college road to get an undergraduate in psychology. But, I still had all this chaos around me. I knew I couldn't go into helping counseling with others with the kinds of drugs and alcohol I was doing or the kind of chaos I was still running. It just, those two didn't match. So I knew there was going to have to be a turn.
That's a piece I didn't put together in my head, that all of this discussion about James, like you're telling me the story effectively of your mother offering her legacy to you. Her legacy to you is opportunity to go do this thing. And all of this is contemporaneous to your existence in addiction.
Yes. And I knew that those were very juxtaposed places. And it's actually an insight to me that my mother was offering her legacy of what she couldn't do to us, especially for someone like me who was going to give it up. It really started to pave the way for there had to be something was going to have to change in my 20s, or I was not going to get to helping people. I wasn't going to be in this field of psychology.
In these conversations, I'm often moved by the journey toward readiness for change, right? When we're sort of blind for a very long time, and then suddenly something happens, and you wake up and you realize there's a tomorrow that's going to be substantively different from today. And you're in effectively a storm before you've named it. What was your inciting incident there?
So very simply, and I think you know this about me, right? It was the loss of my right ring finger. When I lost a physical body part in a construction accident at age 22, really through no fault of my own, wearing a ring, a piece of jewelry that got caught on a piece of machinery. It was a terrible accident.
Yeah.
I can remember being in the emergency room and thinking, okay, I have to stop hurting myself. This is not a good idea. Now I'm losing body parts.
Well, but again, you said it, not as by any fault of your own.
Right.
How do you associate this faultless accident with this appearance of you taking action to hurt yourself?
Because I had to find a way to make sense of it. I think that's what I had from childhood, is I had to find my narrative, my story to make sense of it, to stay sane. It was just going to go crazy if I let the chaos take over. And so here was this, I would gravitate toward these high risk activities. So I had bike accidents and you name it, all kind of banging up myself. And I was just like, I can't keep doing this. And some of it, by my obviously choice factors, but high risk, impulse taking, those kind of things. That was how I framed it. I can't keep doing this. I can't. And then that started to crack open to the space of, I really have got to get away from drugs and alcohol. This is going to not serve me well.
Yeah.
And it was soon thereafter that I came upon a near miss within the legal realm around the use of drugs and alcohol. And I don't know. I came way too close to a potential arrest that would have probably led to a federal indictment at some level. I was around people I did need to be around. And that was the second wake-up call. I'd lost my finger, and now I'd almost had this near legal miss. And that was a grace. I found out about something I wasn't supposed to know that was going to happen. And I'm talking in and about it in a very couched way because of the history involved. Mm-hmm. But my ex-sister-in-law, who I had not seen in 5 years, called me and said, you don't need to go here. You don't need to go do this because of this. And hung up the phone. And I did not go do that thing, that action. And that was the second piece. And I said, okay, this has got I need to change my life in a real demonstrated way. That was 2 years in my mid-20s that I was searching, Bless my soul. I packed a 1979 Datsun pickup with everything I owned and drove to Massachusetts to live with a friend for 3 months because I didn't know what I was going to do with a really bad front end that when I got up there and a mechanic looked at it, like, I'm not sure how you got up here because this should not have worked. You should have gone off the road several times with this car. But it was those kind of things. That's just how I lived, Pete. And so I went through those periods of time stumbling toward my recovery in drugs and alcohol.
You make this transition in your 20s. How do you realize that you're stumbling onto the path that allows you to create your life's work?
Interestingly enough, or not, it starts with intriguing, shiny kind of spaces. And I think it was my best friend David, who I had met as a freshman in college, who knew of a self-help group called Insight in the late 80s, which was an offshoot of EST from the 70s. So it's a deep dive into in your own personal self on these, discovery weekends. And so I went to that conference seeking help during this period of time. And it was at that conference that one of my other best friends, Beth, was paired up with who is now my wife 36 years later as a buddy. And we met, and I was the poetry writing, attention seeking, hyper. I want to do every activity there is in this workshop to get everything I can from it. And my now wife, who saw me then, was just like, oh my God, this egotistical guy, who is this? Not knowing that 6 months later she was going to fall in love with me. So this is strange. We met at a self-help seminar. And I can remember the day I saw my wife Edie at 7th and Congress in Austin, Texas, and her, by this time it was November. I had started these in July, but this was November. She was in a teal blue coat, just gorgeous. And so it was that love factor of relationship. And I had not had many relationships. My longest term relationship before that was probably 6 to 8 months.
Sure.
So it was that falling in love, still questing. I was looking to go to graduate school, but it was her reflection 6 months into our relationship that the way that I use drugs and alcohol is not something she didn't want to be around that in her life. I was ready to get rid of them. I was looking for a reason.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'll stop it. I'll figure this out. And she was going to a counseling center that I started going to, and they helped me get sober in 1987. And the most stark fact in that drug and alcohol recovery center, Pete, which was news to me, is they didn't ask me if I had problems with drugs and alcohol for almost 30 days into going into groups and talking with their counselors. And they asked me, and I'm like, of course I do. That's why I'm here. I'm like, why didn't you ask me 30 days ago? They said, well, when we took your intake history, it was so severe on how much risk you had taken and what kind of things you were using that we thought you would run, that there's just no way somebody who had that. And I had no idea I was on that severity of an end. They said, oh yeah. And I was just shocked that I had no idea that my use was that significant. And, but it was a wake up call to, it's time to get out of this. And so 2 months later, I have a sobriety date of August 28th, 1987. And
clean since then.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
And I have shaved off now caffeine, and sugar, high refined sugars now, which took me another 30 years to shave off. Those were the hardest ones to get rid of because so everywhere. Many people use them naturally. And caffeine, I don't use caffeine. And it's just like those were still addictive substances to me on how I thought about them and used them. And I still can do that to certain degrees, but no, it started way back then, and that just started my road to recovery. But I still wasn't in the world that I am in now. There's a big, big threshold.
I do have a question, and I at risk of completely derailing this conversation, I'm going to ask it because I think the time is right. At what point did you realize that you had enough compassion to love yourself through this healing and transformational journey?
I wouldn't have ever identified it as compassion. But when I look back, it was, my term was, I am hanging on for dear life. That's as compassionate as weary, and I would just tell myself that over and over. Just hang on for dear life. We'll get through this. And that was compassion enough to hold me steady through these insanity of storms and how to put things together. And so it was just, and I think, if I reflect back to my parents and what they did in raising their children at that time, I think they held on for dear life many times through their spiritual space, through impoverished times. Where was the next paycheck or the meal going to come from? And I think I really saw that as resilience with my parents, interestingly enough, as I look back at it now. Neither one of them left. They were married for 58 years when my father passed away. And so they had this constitution with each other that they just didn't leave. And so I think I saw them hang on for dear life. If I was to really think about where that came from, Pete, and the compassion, it has to be from my parents that I just saw them not blink. My father, I was 50 when my father passed away, and I'll just foreshadow this. One of the most spiritual points in my life, or spiritual instances, was after he passed, the day before, after he passed, and I was in a tent near the top of Mount Rainier, camping. I was in a tent by myself. I felt him wake me up at 4:30 in the morning, and he said basically what I interpreted at that time was telling me, and I had always thought my father never really made it in his life because he didn't have a career and he didn't really have money. And those things seemed to be the things we didn't have. He said, don't be mistaken about what life is about. And he said, life was about deep, loving relationships, telling stories, and having fun. And my father had multiple PhDs in every one of those. He could sing, he could be funny, he could be jovial, he could make a meal out of nothing. And he's just that kind of guy, And I think from a positivity point of view, I'm not quite sure how my dad did it. I never really had that conversation with him. So, it's a pretty significant question. I hope it doesn't derail the conversation too much, but it was.
It is a significant question, and I got to tell you, I was 50 when my dad died too, and so you're ahead of me in collective years, but I resonate with that experience, and I wonder, looking at you now, through the screen, how much of your dad am I looking at right now? How much of your dad do you see in yourself today?
Well, that's another really funny question. My younger brother and I, we have a family wedding coming up of my nephew, my brother John's son, Andrew, in December. And I just recently shaved off my hair. And my dad had very little to no hair, but he never fully shaved his head.
So more today than ever.
Yes. And so my younger brother, Michael, said, we're going to have, who looks most like dad contest at this wedding. I see a lot of my dad in me, and a lot of it is in this. The world's a good place, and people are good people. And if you're kind to them, and you can just have fun and tell stories, life is a whole lot easier to live. And I think that's how he navigated the unbelievable stress throughout his life. I can't imagine he didn't otherwise. My dad was also a letter writer, hand letter writer. Many people may not know this about me, but he wrote handwritten letters. Many GIs did. He was in World War II. He would write home to his mother, and to his brothers and to his cousins. And I have that whole stack of letters that I've read through. But I've started to carry that tradition on, that I write handwritten letters to those that are close to me. Just about a Saturday afternoon where I'm sitting around reading a book and I feel like writing a letter to someone. Because to me, it just captures a point in time. It endows a space that we just so dearly miss in this world. And I've done this with my sons and other people close to me for years. And I think I got that from my father. Funny little side bit story. I'll put a plug in for a beautiful band called Krungbin.
New to me. Never heard of them.
Krungbin. It means airplane and tie. I say this because my first cousin, Laura Lee Ochoa, is the bass player in this 3-person band that's from Houston. And It's a very well-known band now. They've had a Grammy nomination. Paul McCartney put them on one of his albums with a compilation, a bunch of people. I say that because when she got the story of my father writing letters, there were letters that were written to her grandfather. And she got those letters and read them and actually produced a song on one of their albums called Dearest Alfred. And it was my father writing letters to his brother in World War II. And so it was just this huge testimony of how significant that is to her. And it's quite a fun little point in time that's still out there. I can listen to that song and just revert back to my father's letters immediately.
Let's turn to something you started with, that you stumbled into your journey as a way to help yourself. I count myself as part of your fandom. I deeply, deeply appreciate and use your insights around emotional storms. And, particularly as we've talked for years now about our shared journey with ADHD. This is not necessarily a plug for it, but I sure as hell will put a link to the book in the show notes. I want to figure out what that period looked like when all of the pieces came together and you said, "Oh, I've got something that I've learned enough that I now need to share."
My stumbling into that was I'd begun working in treatment centers for mental health, long-term treatment centers for mental health in 1987 as a psychiatric technician. Unfortunately, I had been attacked by a psychotic 17-year-old and was on medical leave for 6 weeks because I was so traumatized from it. And I was trying to come back to work, and one of the directors at this center was starting a summer day treatment program for kids with ADHD, and she needed a manager for the program. It was a summer program. I went and interviewed for it. She said, "I think you're the perfect person." I was in my mid-20s. Need someone with obviously high energy. And here we had 10 or 11 kids in 1989 in a summer day treatment program who had really significant ADHD, and it was being led by a great psychologist in Austin, Dr. Larry Backus. And he had designed the cognitive behavioral program that also had a lot of behavior modification with it, and also had all these kind of cutting edge ways to work with kids with ADD. And that's when I tell a story that, I'm playing a 100-card sort game with a 6-year-old. He's getting 40 to 45 pairs of the 50 pairs for his reward time. And here's a kid who throws chairs, bites kids, spits on kids, horribly impulsive. And we were all focused on his behavior problems. And I just simply asked him in curiosity as a 26, 27-year-old newbie, "How are you doing that?" And he said, "I take pictures." I'm like, "What do you mean you take pictures?" "I take pictures of the cards." So here's a 6-year-old with a photographic memory.
Yeah.
And it opened up the chasm that said, we're going to miss that. We would have likely missed that had not someone asked a simple observational question in a reward resource time with this child. We're going to miss it. That chasm was enough of intrigue, similar to what happened with my brother's schizophrenia, that I got to know more. And it led me on a quest. And I just began sifting through, and in 1992 started working with drug and alcohol patients in recovery, and they were using ounces of cocaine a little bit at a time, this time of day, and they were self-medicating. These adults were ADD kids growing up, and we didn't know that. They were self-medicating with cocaine as a stimulant, but they weren't using it like other addicts were. And so these stumbling blocks started opening up, Pete, and it was like, I got connected with a developmental pediatrician who was an ADD savant doctor in Austin, Dr. Byron Cosen, who took me into his practice for 4 years and taught me everything he knew. The journey was just layered with these rich mentors and teachers. And I just kept solving more of the problem. I'm like, these people got to know what's going on with them. So we had to educate them. Oh, these people have to be able to learn to calm themselves down. We got to figure out mindfulness. Oh, these people have a lot of trauma in their life. We got to figure out how to deal with that distress issue. But it was the distress issue, as I told you, theoretically, which has been my real mark in the field as a professional. It's still time-stopping for me. But it came out of 15 years of failure. I couldn't solve the emotional and mental stress problem of those diagnosed with ADD as a professional because clients kept coming back to me with these storms that just wouldn't go away. Strategies, medication, I'm feeling better, but I just got so irritated this morning. I was beside myself again. As a clinician, I didn't know how to help them. And so I had to figure something out. And what I had to figure out and where it started was, interestingly enough, going back to schizophrenia with my brother. That it had to be the impossible problem. I had to look at this as an intractable, disruptive, horribly difficult condition that nobody wanted to see ADD that way. This was about 2004. We could fix it. We could medicate it. We could behaviorally modify it. You could cognitively behavior therapy yourself around it. And you can get through this. And nobody was willing to lift up the Pandora's box lid and say, life is really freaking nuts here, folks. Yeah. This is really hard to live with. And when I started just doing that with clients in group, hey, I know your life is chaotic. I know it's not going away. Let's figure out how to work with it. That's literally what I was started to do in group therapies in 2004 and 5. And they began telling me different things about themselves. Horrific stories, things that they had never told anyone. And suddenly this bonding happened in a group that was just like rock solid. They were bringing tacos to group. It was like this living therapy space. And I'm like, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like trying to hang on for the ride. And we were coming up with using, this is the imagination. It's like, let's try this. Well, let's try this. Let's try this. And so I was teaching others. Yes, it was at this time, I knew my own ADD was there by then. And boy, it was a boundary diffused space that I had a clinician, Dr. James Maynard, who's just retired. He was my clinical supervisor for 32 years, who walked me through all that. You're okay. This is ethical. This is good. These things are helpful. Keep going. Keep going. Again, here was another father-like surrogate mentor of mine. It was just like, stay with what you're doing. Stay with what you're doing. There's something here. And he championed me into really holding my hand through that because I felt like this is insane. You're not supposed to, you shouldn't have to do this as a counselor. This is not how you work. All the theories were against it.
I'm a little bit gobsmacked about if we're to put a scale on the scale of gobsmacked, the continuum that is gobsmacked, that one, people were self-medicating ADHD with cocaine. Let me tell you, that's a today I learned for me. Unreal. Oh, yes. Yeah. And two, that you are so deeply connected to the fact that your professional awakening for these people was connected to the intractable problem of your brother so many years before, that taking this and turning it into something that gives you this sort of unimpeachable faith that the insolvable is solvable. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. It is, because I don't turn away from impossible problems. I lean into them because they're fascinating to me, because I grew up in the complexity and the chaos of the family I grew up in, but there was love there. I knew there was love there. And I went searching for it and I found it. Before my parents passed away, I had a beautiful relationship with both of them with these deep, deep levels of understanding. I think that's, I guess, people are like, well, what are your superpowers? My superpowers is I don't leave. I don't give up. I look at the impossible problem with something that is particularly human psychology. And I've done a lot of reading on schizophrenia, and it's just it's a genetic condition. I've done my genetic coding in my mind. I've talked with a psychologist or a nutritionist biologist about my coding. And interestingly enough, I have one of 3 schizophrenic gene codes in my gene pool. You need all 3 to generally birth schizophrenia at some level. And so I don't have schizophrenia, but I think it gives me a deep reflection about what that mind is like. And to tell you the truth, I think it's why I've been able to use imagination the way I do within my practice. So here's something that is oddly genetic, that's horribly disruptive for most people, that I've been able to turn and use within the world of ADHD. And I never knew that was going to happen. Yeah. And I've never talked about that. There's so many of these stories that have never been put together, which was why I was like, okay, I'm going to trust Pete. Pete's going to do Life Legacy. Let's go.
Let's see what happens.
I got a lot of life to talk about here.
You've got a lot of life to talk about, and I open this calling you a storm chaser, and that experience of being able to see emotional distress as a thing that comes and with tools leaves, allows you to find peace, has been incredibly powerful to me as a guiding metaphor. After all of these years of listening to people's stories yourself, right, about seeing these sort of emergent behaviors come about, what patterns have you put together for yourself and others about what brings people peace?
It's a unique combination of events in any individual's life. But the common denominators in that have words like it stops time, something that brings me to a stillness I couldn't find otherwise. Some people will find that out of music or art or nature or doing some type of a project or a passion, but they suddenly feel like they could be here the rest of their lives. The majority of the chaos around ADHD doesn't allow people to find that. They run past it. They never slow down enough. And so that pausing element of beginning to teach people, and much of this is in hindsight, Pete, it was like, okay, what's going to make sense here? What is going to make sense of the chaos of ADD? Oh, it's like storms. They come and they go, and they never quite stay. I'm like, oh, well, that fits. And I just ran with it. I had no idea the deep nature with which it really does reflect exactly what it is. But it gives you and I a toehold, a space to say, this will pass. Hang on. And then when you're in the calm in between and you begin looking for things to resource yourself, to calm yourself, those are incredibly unique to every individual. And I think if you put them into a space of just triteness that says, oh, well, you got to go read poetry, or you got to go sing, or you're telling people potentially what to do is the first thing we don't like on the attention spectrum. But giving someone the open card to discover what stops time for you, what holds you in place in a sense of awe, because we all have that. Follow that, and you're going to find peace. Follow that, and you're going to find potentially some marker of purpose, some marker of meaning, some marker I can return to. One of the funniest things, and this had to do somewhat with ADD, but during COVID, it was fascinating to me that I helped more people create what I call their own little private Idahos in their house, in the attic, in a closet, somewhere they could go where no one else could get there and they could feel calm and at peace. And we had all these little bitty private places. I had one woman who just lit her walk-in closet up with these little tinkle lights and big beanbag chairs and essential oils, and she was just like, put a deadbolt on the doors, like, no one's getting in here. Stay out of here. I'm in. But it gave her that time-stopping space.
That's what a panic room should be, James. Like a panic. Where I go when I'm panicking, I go into this little space.
You should, absolutely. It would calm panic for sure. It would.
Do you ever take time to think? I mean, as a guy who is constantly creating new things, you are. Do you ever stop and think about what endures when the work is done?
A good book endures for me. Swinging in a hammock is enduring for me. I mean, that's how I take that question. What's left over, what hangs around. I've gotten to the point that there's been so much water under the bridge in a significant, meaningful way that the body of work that I have, if I stopped today, I'm really, I feel really moved that it wouldn't stop. It would continue. And that's one of the things I have with my youngest son about keeping my websites up and keeping my work up through his life so that it's reachable. So what endures? It's the ability to stop and, so now I have enough that I could stop and look back, but it still doesn't stop my incessant drive because I don't think I'm there yet. And that's not a way that says I haven't been there. I don't have enough yet. I think I have plenty, and I think it's helpful. I do think that there are thresholds in this second book that need to be crossed. And maybe I'm fooling myself because maybe there's another book beyond that I'm not seeing yet. I don't think so. But I didn't think the first book had a second book. But that's how books go.
We have reached that point in this show where we ask the great question of the age, which is obviously the great MacGuffin of the show. But I do think it's complicated to envision where you're going to go with this answer because of just how much you've been through and how much love you give back. What do you want written on your headstone?
Wow, that's a very good question. Some of the things that come to me are things like he had a passion for helping others help themselves. I think that's kind of what I summarize. I want people to know themselves better so that they're better experts on themselves. And kind of a subset to that would be he never met a shiny object he didn't like. Because something lights me up and I am a kid in a candy store. But I do think this helping others to help themselves, because that's what I'm trying to do for me. And Pete, is there just, we don't have enough of that in this world. But that's,
It feels pretty good. It feels pretty good.
Yeah. And I want others to take deep reflective time for themselves. And when they end in negativity or they end in criticism or they end in judgment of their life, when they're doing that self-reflection, to really be bold enough to just say, that's not my focus. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to turn somewhere else and keep turning somewhere else for the time stopping space, those kind of things. I don't know. I really can't thank you enough for opening the space today to give me a chance to reflect.
I can't thank you enough for coming here in all vulnerability to have this conversation in a way that you and I have never spoken before. It is a great honor, and I tell you with all the greatest love and respect, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Pete, for offering the platform and the opportunity. You're doing a great service by getting people's life stories out in a way that others can help to create their own life stories. So wonderful space. Absolutely, Pete.
Every time I talk to James Ochoa, I end up rethinking what it means to survive your own story. I've known him for years as this calm voice on the emergency radio, the guy who could name the chaos in life and make it somehow feel temporary. But hearing him trace his own history, the overcrowded house, the bathtub sanctuary, The brother who suffered, the finger lost, the near misses, the long, slow climb toward peace. Something shifted. What strikes me most isn't actually his remarkable resilience. Of course, there's plenty of that. It's his tenderness, his ability to look at all that pain and chaos and somehow come away with compassion for himself, for his parents, for everyone, just trying to make sense of being alive. And I keep thinking about that 8-year-old boy who plugged the overflow in the bathtub so he could float in silence a little bit longer. I think maybe that's where it started. The first person James ever helped was himself. Not by fixing the noise around him, but by finding the stillness inside of it. Funny that it is, in fact, what he's been teaching ever since. If legacy is what remains after the storms pass, then James might just be this: a reminder that peace isn't something we find. It's something we practice. One quiet moment, one conversation, one act of reflection at a time. I'm Pete Wright. Thanks for listening. I can't wait to join you right back here next time around the headstone.